Usually when we hear a word like freedom or emancipation, there is this immediate expectation of like a Hollywood-style happy ending.
Right.
You know the scene. The heavy iron chains fall away, the triumphant music swells, and the person just walks off into a bright, completely unburdened future.
Yeah, the classic cinematic moment.
Exactly. But as you are about to find out today, history rarely writes a clean script. We are doing a deep dive into a word and a concept that seems incredibly straightforward on paper, which is manumission.
Yes.
And that is the formal legal term for the act of an enslaver freeing the people they enslaved. And I mean, it sounds like an act of pure benevolence, right?
It really does, on the surface anyway.
Right. But the stack of sources we are diving into today for you, they reveal something entirely different. Manumission wasn't always a simple act of grace. Often it was a highly calculated tool engineered to maintain control and incentivize compliance within the very system of slavery itself.
What's fascinating here is that as we journey through these sources, we see how different societies essentially built massive, invisible cages to replace the physical one.
Wow.
Yeah. We're going to look at ancient Greece and Rome, colonial Peru, the Caribbean, the U.S., and the Ottoman Empire. And they all engineered highly specific, often rigid rules around who got freedom and exactly why.
Right.
It was almost never just a blank check handed over out of the goodness of someone's heart.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to understand how this actually worked in practice. Where do the earliest blueprints for this concept even come from?
Well, we can trace a lot of the foundational legal blueprints back to the ancient Mediterranean, specifically ancient Greece.
Okay.
And right away, the transaction of freedom was overwhelmingly conditional. It wasn't about an enslaver waking up one day and deciding to, do the right thing.
Sure.
Very often, manumission was deferred entirely until the master's death. It was just written into their wills.
So the master gets a lifetime of free labor, and the enslaved person gets the mere promise of eventual freedom.
Yes, exactly.
Assuming they remain perfectly obedient until the very end, I guess.
Precisely. I mean, it was the ultimate carrot on a stick. There were rare cases where slaves could actually buy their own freedom while the master was alive, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a status known as chorus oikointes. We actually have records of two 4th century bankers, Patience and Formion, who had been enslaved before they managed to save enough to buy their freedom.
Wow.
They actually rose to prominence. Or, in even rarer circumstances, the state could step in. Like Athens famously liberated everyone who fought at the Battle of Arginusae in 406 BC.
But wait, if you bought your freedom or won it in battle, what actually happened the next day? Like, did you just blend into Athenian society as a regular citizen?
No,
No?
not at all.
Okay.
That is the crucial catch here. Even when a slave in ancient Greece was freed, they did not become a citizen.
Oh.
They became what was called a metic, which translates roughly to a resident alien. And here, the real tether, their former master, automatically became their prostates.
The prostate.
Yeah, their legal guarantor or guardian.
A guardian. For a fully grown adult who just bought their own freedom.
Yes, the former slave could be bound to continuing duties for the master. And under a practice called paramon, they were commonly required to actually live near their former master.
You're kidding.
No, they couldn't just pack up and move to another city-state to start fresh.
So it's almost like a corporate non-compete clause mixed with a perpetual retainer.
That's a great way to put it.
You get the payout of freedom, but you're still legally tethered to your boss. Like, you can own property, and sure, your kids are born free, but you personally are still trapped in the physical and legal orbit of the person who used to own you.
That is a very apt analogy. It was a mechanism to grant a release without the master losing the social and economic benefits that the former slave provided.
Right.
The master kept the loyalty, kept the proximity, but shed the cost of daily upkeep.
If Greece kept you in this weird legal purgatory where you were a resident alien, did any ancient society actually offer a clean break? Did anyone actually hand over full citizenship?
They did. And we see that shift dramatically when we look at ancient Rome.
Okay, Rome.
Right. So under Roman law, a slave originally had no personhood whatsoever. They were legally categorized purely as property. I mean, literally no different than a cart or a plow.
Wow.
But when a Roman slave was manumitted, becoming a liberatus or a liberta, they actually became a Roman citizen.
That is a massive distinction from Greece. How did that transition from property to citizen actually happen?
Well, the Romans were incredibly theatrical, so it involved a highly specific civic ceremony called Manumission Vindicta.
Freedom by the rod.
Exactly. The master would bring the enslaved person before a magistrate in a really public setting, and a civil servant, a lictor, would step forward with a specific rod called a festuca.
Okay.
The lictor would lay the rod on the slave's head and formally declare them free. Then the master would pronounce, "I wish this man to be free," physically turn the person around in a circle and let them go.
That physical turning around is such a striking visual.
It was very symbolic. And then came an even more potent visual marker, which was the pileus.
The felt cap.
Right, this soft, undyed felt cap. Enslaved people were strictly forbidden from wearing it. But when you were freed, your head was publicly shaved, and you were handed this cap.
So it was an instant signal.
Exactly. Wearing it was a highly visible signal to everyone on the street that you were a free citizen.
I remember reading that the cap actually became the enduring emblem of liberty itself. Like, even the Roman goddess of freedom, Libertas, is depicted holding it. But what really blows my mind about the Roman system is the financial ceiling.
Yeah.
It seems like once you had that cap, the upward mobility was wild. You have characters like Trimalchio from the Satyricon, who was massively wealthy.
The financial ceiling was indeed blown wide open.
Yeah.
Freed slaves were barred from holding the highest public offices or, serving as specific priests. But if they were sharp at business, Roman society placed almost no limits on the wealth they could amass.
Right.
They took their former owner's family name and became a client who still owed social obligations to their former master as a patron, but economically they could completely out-earn them.
Right, because you have historical figures who are the children of freed slaves reaching the absolute pinnacle of society.
Oh, absolutely.
The great Augustan poet Horace was the son of a freedman. The 2nd century Emperor Pertinax was the son of a freedman. That level of generational elite from property to emperor is staggering.
It is staggering, but we must also temper that with the realities of Roman stratification, particularly regarding gender.
Okay.
A freed woman, Liberta, became a citizen, but female Roman citizenship did not grant anywhere near the same rights, independence, or protections as men.
Right, of course.
They were legally prevented from participating in public and civic society, like voting or holding office. So, while Rome offered a very real path to citizenship and wealth, that path was still heavily walled in by the strict patriarchal codes of the era.
So Rome essentially turned freedom into a highly public civic transaction to build a loyal, wealth-generating underclass. But what happens when you fast forward a bit and add the Catholic Church into this equation?
Yes.
Does introducing religious morality actually make the system of manumission more humane or just better at hiding its cruelty?
That takes us to colonial Latin America, specifically Peru. And the short answer is that the system becomes deeply entangled with the church and incredibly effective at hiding deeply hidden family secrets.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In colonial Peru, the legal framework was governed by the Siete Partidas, which is an old Castilian law code. This code explicitly demanded that freed people honor and obey their former masters for giving them such a, well, they called it a generous gift.
So we are back to that mandatory gratitude we saw in Greece.
Yes. The most straightforward way for enslaved people to gain freedom there was through a practice called courtation. This is essentially a formalized installment plan.
Right.
An enslaved person could literally negotiate a purchase price with their enslaver and buy their freedom over time, piece by piece.
Okay, buying your own freedom over time makes logical sense from an economic standpoint. But the sources spent a lot of time on something called baptismal manumission. How did that work?
This is where it gets incredibly complex. Enslavers would bring enslaved infants to the baptismal font and formally grant them their freedom right in front of the priest.
Okay.
On the surface, the paperwork frames this as a beautiful act of religious mercy and Christian charity.
Wait, hold on. They freed the infant, but the sources say the mothers were almost never manumitted alongside their children.
Exactly.
Labor-wise, what is the strategy there? You have a free baby living in the quarters of an enslaved mother. That sounds like a chaotic household dynamic. Wasn't this essentially a hostage situation disguised as a holy gift to ensure the parents' loyalty?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it was exactly that. A brilliant and terrible hostage situation.
Wow.
A child who was freed at baptism but continued to live with their enslaved family was at a much higher risk of simply being re-enslaved later on.
Oh, because they're right there.
Yeah, because their Carta de Libertad, their freedom paper, wasn't always enough to protect them from a corrupt system. Freeing the child was a very effective, deeply manipulative way for owners to guarantee the absolute obedience and loyalty of the still enslaved parents.
Right, because the parents wouldn't dare run away or rebel if it meant leaving their legally free child behind in the enslaver's household.
Precisely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The sources point out a very stark demographic difference between the enslavers who were doing this.
Yes.
Female owners who freed slaves at baptism used very intimate, affectionate language in the legal records. They would write things like, "For the love I have for her," but male owners almost never used that kind of language. Why the massive difference in tone?
The reason for that absence of affection in the written record is quite dark. Many of the children being manumitted at baptism by male owners were, in fact, the owner's own illegitimate, unacknowledged children born to enslaved women. So the male owners would characterize the manumission purely as an act of generous Christian beneficence. This allowed them to free their own biological children without ever having to publicly admit to the sexual exploitation of the enslaved mothers.
That is just staggering hypocrisy.
It completely masked the biological reality of the situation under the guise of piety.
Using the church font to launder your own secrets, and we see a similar chaos with deathbed manumissions in Peru, too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Slave owners frequently used their last will and testament to free people, often citing a desire to die with a clear conscience.
Right.
Under Ibero-American law, a person had absolute discretion over 1/5 of their estate, meaning they could free a certain number of enslaved people without legally disinheriting their spouse or children.
Okay.
But these deathbed manumissions were incredibly messy in practice. Greedy heirs would constantly dispute the wills. They would claim fraud or argue that the enslaved person had manipulated the owner when they were in a weak mental state.
Because the heirs are suddenly watching their inheritance, their property, literally walk out the door.
Exactly. The courts usually respected the wills, but the heirs fought tooth and nail to prevent the loss. And even when the freedom was granted, it was often conditional.
Always strings attached.
Always. The will might stipulate that the freed person was legally obligated to care for a surviving elderly relative of the master until that person died. So even from beyond the grave, the strings are still attached.
Peru seems so heavily driven by guilt, religious optics, and family secrets. What happens when you strip the religion and the guilt entirely away and freedom becomes a purely financial equation?
Then you arrive in the Caribbean and North America.
Okay.
Here, the bureaucracy of freedom was dictated by raw economics, red tape, and the shifting tides of agriculture, and it was often punitively expensive. Take the island of Barbados as a prime example.
What were they doing?
If an owner wanted to manumit someone, they couldn't just declare it. They had to show cause to the local authorities and pay an exorbitant fee to the state. It was £200 for a male slave and £300 for a female slave.
£300 in the colonial era. That is an astronomical sum of money.
It was a fortune. I mean, it was a legislative wall designed specifically to make legal freedom mathematically impossible for the vast majority of people. The state wanted to ensure that no freed person could ever become a financial burden on the parish, so they just priced freedom out of existence.
But people still found a way. The sources highlight this incredible woman, Susanna Ostrahan.
Oh, her story is amazing.
She was an ex-slave in Barbados who essentially built an entire business empire as a huckster and a trader for one singular purpose. She navigated that oppressive financial hurdle, scraping together those massive 200 and 300-pound fees specifically to buy her own family members and friends out of the system.
Her story is a remarkable testament to human resilience. She understood that the system only spoke the language of capital, so she mastered that language to save her loved ones.
Yeah?
The psychological and financial toll of having to buy your own family from a government that views them as livestock is difficult to fully comprehend, and it varied wildly by geography, too.
How so?
Well, contrast Barbados with Jamaica, where manumission went largely unregulated until the 1770s when they started requiring bonds. Even without the massive fees, freedom in Jamaica was incredibly rare.
Really?
Yeah, one study estimates only 165 slaves won their freedom that way around 1770. But those who did manage it formed the foundation of the free population of color on the island.
How does the timeline in the United States compare to that Caribbean model? Did we see that same reliance on massive fees and bureaucracy?
The United States shows a fascinating and, well, ultimately tragic evolution based almost entirely on the shifting needs of agriculture. In the early colonial days, you do see isolated instances of maneuverability. We have records from 1661 in New Amsterdam of a freedwoman named Rachel Angola.
Right.
She became the first black person to individually petition a legislature asking for the manumission of her adopted son. Or figures like Anthony Johnson in the 17th century, who gained his freedom and actually became a prosperous landowner in Virginia.
So there was some early flexibility.
There was, but as the plantation economy solidified, the laws aggressively locked down.
Right, because if you are building an economy entirely dependent on mass, unpaid labor, you can't have people legally opting out of it.
Precisely. By the early 1700s, laws were passed stating slaves couldn't be set free at all unless for meritorious services that had to be personally judged by the governor.
Wow, making it almost impossible.
Exactly. But then we see a massive pivot in the late 18th century in the Upper South. Planters were transitioning away from labor-intensive tobacco cultivation.
Because it depletes the soil, right?
Yeah, tobacco aggressively depletes the soil. So they moved toward mixed crop farming, like wheat and corn, which simply require far less year-round labor.
Okay.
Suddenly, these planters had a surplus of enslaved people that were expensive to feed in-house.
So what does this all mean? Did the laws change just because the crops changed?
They absolutely did. Virginia repealed those harsh restrictions in 1782, suddenly allowing masters to free slaves of their own accord. And we see a massive spike in manumissions because of that.
Really?
Yeah. Robert Carter III, a wealthy Virginian planter, emancipated almost 500 slaves, starting in 1791. The proportion of free black people in the Upper South jumped from less than 1% to 10% in just 2 decades.
It is incredibly cynical. Morality essentially took a backseat to profit margins.
It really did.
When tobacco stopped paying the bills, suddenly enslavers found their conscience. But knowing American history, I'm assuming that window didn't stay open for long. What flipped the economics back?
One single invention, the cotton gin, in 1793.
Ah, of course.
Before the gin, cleaning short staple cotton by hand was so incredibly slow that it wasn't a profitable mass crop. The cotton gin mechanized the cleaning process. Suddenly, vast new expanses of the Deep South could be cultivated for cotton, and it became wildly, unfathomably profitable.
Right.
The bottleneck was no longer cleaning the cotton. The bottleneck was picking it. The demand for slave labor skyrocketed overnight, and as a direct result, the rate of manumissions plummeted.
But was it purely just greed driving the lockdown, or was there something else at play?
It was a potent mix of greed and sheer paranoia. The Haitian Revolution, which successfully overthrew the colonial government and freed enslaved people, sent shockwaves of absolute terror through American slaveholders.
Oh, I bet.
That fear of armed uprising was compounded domestically by the 1831 rebellion led by Nat Turner.
So they realized that a growing population of free black people living right next to an enslaved population undermined the entire psychological control of the system.
That was exactly their fear. In response, Southern states panicked and passed laws making manumission virtually impossible. In South Carolina, you needed explicit permission from the state legislature just to free one single person. In Florida, they eventually prohibited manumission altogether. The legal door to freedom was slammed firmly shut, and it stayed that way until the 13th Amendment in 1865.
So in the Americas, we see freedom heavily dictated by the soil, the crops, and the fear of revolt.
Yeah.
Was there anywhere in the sources where freedom was restricted purely by demographics, like specifically by gender?
Yes. For that, we have to look at the Ottoman Empire, which presents a deeply troubling dynamic. Under their policy, guided by interpretations of Islamic law at the time, the manumission of male slaves was actually quite common and culturally encouraged.
Okay.
But the manumission of female slaves was tightly, aggressively restricted, and the demographic reality of this is stark. Across centuries of the Islamic Empire's slave trade, the ratio was roughly 2 females traded for every 1 male.
2 women for every man. Why the massive disparity, and why hold the women back from the freedom that was being offered to the men?
The sources are very clear on the reason. It was explicitly about concubinage and domestic sexual slavery.
Oh, I see.
Sexual slavery was a central, lawful pillar of the Ottoman slave system. Even outside of explicit concubinage, most female slaves were forced into domestic occupations, working in private homes and harems that implicitly included sexual relations with their masters.
That's horrifying.
It was the most common motive for purchasing female slaves, and tragically, the primary motivation for retaining them and refusing them, the manumission that male laborers might eventually earn.
But wait, in the 19th century, wasn't there a massive international push to end this? Didn't Europe start forcing the Ottoman Empire to sign all these anti-slavery treaties. I'm thinking of the Firman of 1830 or the 1889 Canoneme or the 1890 Brussels Conference Act. Did international treaties actually change the culture on the ground, or do they just force the exact same atrocities to operate in the shadows?
You hit the nail on the head. They changed the optics, but not the reality. The public face of the empire agreed to suppress the trade to appease European powers, but a massive clandestine market simply sprang up.
So it just went underground.
Completely. Gangs organized illegal imports. The taking of women and children as spoils of war officially lessened on paper, but it doesn't stop in practice. We see this horrifically illustrated as late as the Armenian genocide in 1915, where Armenian girls were systematically sold into slavery despite vehement public denials by the government.
That's chilling to think of that happening in 1915 in the era of photography and modern warfare.
It forces us to confront how deeply entrenched these systems of human commodification really are. Turkey didn't even ratify the League of Nations Convention on Suppressing Slavery until 1933, and even then, illegal sales of girls were still being reported in the shadows.
Wow.
They didn't adopt explicit ironclad legislation prohibiting slavery until 1964.
1964. We have listeners whose parents were alive in 1964. That is practically yesterday in historical terms.
It really is.
As we pull all of these incredibly heavy threads together, I think there is a profound realization for you, the listener, to take away from all this. We started by noting that manumission sounds like an absolute good.
Right.
But historically, it was almost always a lever pulled by the powerful to serve their own interests. It was a mechanism designed to extract a final ounce of value. It was taxed as a revenue stream in Rome.
Yeah.
It was weaponized to control parents through their children in Peru. It was priced entirely out of reach by the bureaucracy in Barbados. It was halted the moment the cotton gin made human labor too profitable in America. And it was categorically denied to women in the Ottoman Empire to perpetuate domestic exploitation. Freedom, in the context of manumission, was rarely a clean break.
This raises an important question, and it's the final thought I'd like to leave you with today.
Right.
When we look at the historical fine print of manumission, the exorbitant government fees, the lifelong legal tethers, the rules keeping a person bound to their former master, we have to ask ourselves something.
Swap.
In what ways do modern societies still practice conditional freedom today? How often do we celebrate the lifting of a visible chain while entirely ignoring the invisible financial, legal, or systemic strings that immediately take its place?
That is the exact question we need to be asking, because history isn't just about memorizing what happened centuries ago. It's the lens through which we understand the mechanisms of power operating around us right now. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the historical narratives you think you know, and we'll see you next time.
If you leave a green apple on your desk, you just expect it to be there when you get back.
Right, exactly.
It has this definite independent reality. It's green, it's solid, and it's sitting exactly where you left it, whether you were looking at it or not. But today, we're asking you to completely throw that comforting idea right out the window. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We're relying on the incredibly comprehensive Wikipedia article on quantum entanglement to really break down one of the most, genuinely reality-breaking topics in physics.
Yeah, it really is a total paradigm shift.
It is. And our mission today is to give you a shortcut to really understanding this stuff without getting bogged down in all the heavy math.
Right, and I'm here to connect the dots on why this incredibly weird phenomenon is actually redefining how we think about computing and, well, communication on a global scale.
So let's just get right into it. When we talk about particles being entangled, my first thought is like two shoelaces tied in a knot.
Sure.
But this is subatomic, happening across potentially infinite space. So how does that actually work?
Okay, so imagine a single, unstable subatomic particle. Let's just say it has an overall spin of 0.
Okay.
In physics, spin is a fundamental property. It's like charge or mass. Now, this particle decays, right? And it splits into two separate particles that shoot off in opposite directions.
A little explosion.
Exactly like that. And because of this universal rule, the conservation of angular momentum.
The total spin in the universe can't just change out of nowhere.
You got it. The original was 0, so the two new particles must add up to 0 to balance the ledger. That's called the singlet state.
Okay.
So if you measure the first particle on a specific axis and find it to be, quote-unquote, spin up, the other particle, when measured on that exact same axis, absolutely must be spin down.
They balance each other out.
Yes. They are perfectly anti-correlated. You literally cannot mathematically describe the state of one without completely defining the state of the other. They act as a single, inseparable system, even if one is right here in New York and the other is all the way on Mars.
See, okay, I have to stop you there because my deeply logical, classical brain is really fighting this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds, honestly, a bit mundane.
Mundane. How so?
Well, there's that famous anecdote right in the source about the physicist John Bell and his colleague Reinhold Bertelsmann, the guy who supposedly always wore mismatched socks.
Oh, yes, Bertelsmann's socks, a classic.
Right, so if Bertelsmann walks into my office and I see a pink sock on his left foot, I instantly know with 100% certainty that the sock on his right foot is not pink.
Right.
I've gained knowledge about his distant foot instantaneously. So isn't this entire concept just this subatomic version of Bertelsmann's socks? Like the particles were always opposites, we just packed them in two different boxes and didn't know which was which until we opened one.
It is so tempting to think that way. That is actually called the hidden variable theory.
Hidden variables, right?
Yeah, you're assuming that those particles, just like the socks, had a definite state of being up or down all along, just hidden from our view until the moment of observation. But the problem is, quantum mechanics completely destroys that sock analogy.
Why, though? I mean, a particle is a physical thing. Why wouldn't it have a state before I look at it?
Because of the uncertainty principle.
Okay.
A sock is dyed pink at a factory, and it stays pink. But a quantum particle exists in the sort of fluid cloud of probabilities, a superposition, until it interacts with something.
Oh, so it's not actually pink or blue yet.
Right. And the real weirdness hits when we don't just measure straight up and down. Like, what if we measure along different, totally unpredictable axes?
I see.
The properties we are measuring are physically incompatible. You literally cannot measure them simultaneously with arbitrary precision. So it's not an actual correlation of pre-existing traits. It is purely a potential correlation.
Wait, so by opening the box, I'm not just finding out what color the sock is. I'm forcing it to pick a color right then and there.
Exactly. The measurement of one particle doesn't just reveal reality. It forces reality to happen.
Wow.
It causes an irreversible collapse of the wave function for the whole entangled system. When you force your particle in New York to choose a state, you instantaneously force the particle on Mars into the opposite state.
That is deeply unsettling.
It should be.
Well, it makes me feel a lot better about my own confusion because Albert Einstein found this conceptually offensive.
Yeah.
He absolutely hated it, didn't he?
Oh, he despised it. He was fiercely opposed to the implications. This debate was really the crux of a decades-long battle over the soul of physics.
Right.
Back in 1931, he came up with this thought experiment involving a box emitting a photon to try and poke holes in it. And then in 1935, he, Boris Podolsky, and Nathan Rosen published the famous EPR paradox paper.
Basically arguing that quantum mechanics must be incomplete.
Yes, they insisted there had to be hidden variables, those pre-existing sock colors that we just couldn't see yet.
And Erwin Schrödinger jumped into the fray right around this time too, right?
Yeah.
He's the one who gave the phenomenon its name.
He did. He wrote a letter to Einstein in 1935 coining the German term Verschränkung.
Which translates to entanglement.
Right. But what is so vital here is that Schrödinger didn't just call it another feature of quantum mechanics. He called it the characteristic trait, the single concept that forces a complete departure from classical lines of thought.
So what was Einstein so afraid of? If the universe is weird, why couldn't he just accept that it's weird? What did this whole wave function collapsing idea actually threaten?
It threatened causality itself, and specifically Einstein's own theory of relativity.
The speed limit of the universe.
Exactly. Relativity establishes the speed of light as the absolute unbreakable speed limit. No information, no physical influence can travel faster than light. But if you measuring a particle in New York instantly dictates the state of a particle on Mars.
That interaction is happening faster than light. It's happening in zero time.
Which implies a blatant violation of local realism. That's why Einstein famously disparaged the concept as spukhafte Fernwirkung.
Spooky action at a distance.
Yes. He just refused to believe the universe operated by magic.
And honestly, he has a point. So for decades, you have Einstein saying, look, your math is incomplete. The universe isn't a ghost story. And the quantum pioneers are saying, no, the math works. The universe is just weirder than you want it to be. How do you even settle a debate like that?
You wait for someone smart enough to turn a philosophical argument into a testable math problem?
Enter John Bell.
Yes. In 1964, John Bell published what we now call Bell's theorem. And it is arguably one of the most profound discoveries in the history of science.
The moment the rubber meets the road. But how did he actually prove this? Because measuring two particles and seeing their opposites doesn't prove they didn't start as opposites, right?
That's the genius of it. Bell realized you could test the hidden variable theory by measuring the entangled particles along multiple randomly chosen axes.
So not just straight up and down.
Right, maybe tilted at 45 degrees or 120 degrees. And he calculated a strict mathematical limit for how often the measurements would match up if the particles had pre-programmed hidden instructions.
Like a statistical ceiling.
Exactly like a statistical ceiling. It's basically Venn diagram logic. Any universe that obeys Einstein's local realism has to stay under Bell's limit.
Okay.
But quantum mechanics predicted that because the particles don't have set instructions, because they are a single spread-out wave function that collapses instantly, they would correlate more often than classical logic allows.
They would break Bell's limit. So all we had to do was run the experiment and see if the limit breaks.
It took years to develop the technology, but Stuart Friedman and Jean Clauser finally did it in 1972 using atomic cascades. And then Elaine Aspect did even more rigorous tests in 1982.
They generated entangled pairs and measured them along rapidly switching axes, and nature disobeyed the Venn diagram.
It shattered it. They statistically violated Bell's inequality. They proved that local hidden variables cannot explain the correlations.
So Einstein's version of a strictly local, predictable universe was definitively dead.
It was. Elaine Aspect, John Clauser, and Anton Zeilinger actually won the 2022 Nobel Prize for this work.
Okay, so my sci-fi brain instantly jumps to the implications here. If I have a particle in New York, and you have one in Tokyo, and they're instantly correlated across space, why am I paying for a cell phone plan?
A quantum telegraph.
Yeah. Why can't I build a faster-than-light phone? I put my particle in a machine, I force it to spin up, which instantly forces yours to spin down. We assign binary ones and zeros to the spins, and boom, we have instantaneous Morse code across the galaxy.
It is the ultimate dream, but unfortunately the universe has a built-in firewall against it. It's called the no communication theorem.
But the connection is instant. If my flip causes your flip, that is communication.
The catch is the word force. You cannot force your particle to spin up. The outcome of your measurement is entirely fundamentally random. You are essentially rolling a quantum die.
Oh, so I measure it, hoping for a 1 so I can send you a message, but it might just be a 0.
Right. You roll the die, and let's say it lands on 1. Because of entanglement, you now instantly know that my die in Tokyo is showing a 0.
Okay.
But because you couldn't control your outcome, you can't encode a message. To me, sitting in Tokyo, my die just looks completely random. I have no way of knowing if my particle is in a state of 0 because you measured yours, or if it just happened to collapse that way naturally.
So I wouldn't know if it's a message or just static.
Exactly. The only way we can verify the entanglement is if you call me on a normal, slower-than-light telephone and tell me what you rolled.
So Einstein lost local realism, but relativity holds. The speed of light speed limit is preserved for actual information. We can share a spooky connection, but we can't use it to gossip faster than light.
Right, causality is preserved.
That feels like a massive compromise by the universe. If we can't use it for a galactic telephone, what is the practical value of all these entangled particles?
In modern quantum information theory, entanglement is treated as a highly valuable, expendable resource, like a specialized fuel. It enables something called LOCC, which stands for Local Operations and Classical Communication.
And what does that let us do?
The most famous application is quantum teleportation.
Teleportation. Now, we have to clarify this before anyone gets too excited. Are we talking Star Trek beam me up, transferring physical matter, or is this something else?
It's a bit different.
Let me pitch an analogy. Is it like me calling you on the phone to tell you how to build a Lego set exactly like mine, but the quantum rules demand that my original Lego set violently explodes the second I read you the instructions?
That analogy is surprisingly accurate, especially the explosion part.
Really?
Yeah. In quantum teleportation, you aren't moving physical matter. You are transferring a quantum state the exact fragile properties of a particle.
So how does the entanglement act as the fuel for this?
Let's say Alice wants to teleport a specific quantum state to Bob. They already share a pair of entangled particles. Alice takes the particle she wants to teleport, and she performs a joint measurement on it together with her half of the entangled pair.
And that measurement is the explosion.
Yes, because measuring a quantum system collapses it, the act of reading the information permanently destroys the original state in Alice's lab.
Wow.
This is a fundamental rule called the no-cloning theorem. You cannot perfectly copy an unknown quantum state. It must be destroyed in one place to exist in another.
So Alice measures them, destroying the original, and then what?
That measurement produces a set of classical data, just regular ones and zeros. Alice sends that data to Bob over a normal light-speed connection, like fiber optics.
Okay.
Bob receives the data, applies a specific mathematical operation to his half of the entangled pair, and his particle instantly transforms into an absolutely perfect, indistinguishable replica of Alice's original particle.
I am sacrificing my Lego set to the void, just so you can reconstruct it on the other side. That is beautifully tragic.
It is.
But wait, if we can teleport states using entanglement as a bridge, can we manipulate things we've never even interacted with?
We can. This brings us to a mind-bending process called entanglement swapping. You are essentially teleporting entanglement itself.
How does that work?
Imagine two completely separate pairs of entangled particles. Pair 1 is particles A and B. Pair 2 is particles C and D. These two pairs have never interacted. They were created in different machines.
Okay, two isolated couples.
Now bring particles B and C together and perform that same joint measurement we just talked about. By measuring B and C together, they become entangled.
Okay, but what about A and D?
That's the crazy part. The remaining outlying particles, A and D, suddenly collapse into an entangled state with each other.
Wait, A and D are perfectly entangled, acting as a single quantum system, even though they have never, ever touched. You're literally matchmaking particles across the void.
Yes. You've created an entangled link between 2 points in space that have no direct causal history. And if you think that's wild, researchers have used this underlying logic to do things that sound like literal magic, like the 2014 ghost imaging experiment led by Gabriela Barreto Lemos.
Ghost imaging? That sounds like snapping a Polaroid of a poltergeist.
It's not far off. They managed to produce a visible image of an object using light that had never physically interacted with that object.
How is that physically possible?
Oh.
A camera works because light bounces off an object and hits a lens. If the light never touches the object, where is the image coming from?
You use two pairs of entangled photons. Let's call them the red photons and the blue photons. You take the red photons and fire them at your subject. Let's say it's a stencil of a cat.
Yeah.
Some red photons hit the stencil and are blocked. Others pass through the cutout.
Okay, so the red photons now hold the shape of the cat. So we just point a camera at the red photon.
No, we throw the red photons away. We don't measure them at all.
What do we look at?
We look entirely at their entangled partners, the blue photons, which have been kept completely isolated in a different part of the lab.
Right.
Because the entangled pairs are perfectly correlated, when a red photon passes through the stencil, its blue partner registers on a highly sensitive coincidence detector. By mapping out only the blue photons whose partners successfully pass through the cutout, an image of the cat emerges.
You're extracting a photograph of a cat from photons that have never been in the same room as the cat.
Exactly. The information is transferred entirely through the non-local correlation of the entanglement.
Okay, my biggest hang-up here is that this all sounds incredibly fragile. For decades, the defense against quantum weirdness was that it only happens in a multi-million-dollar vacuum chamber. The moment a subatomic particle bumps into a stray molecule of air, the magic breaks.
Right.
If entanglement is so fundamental to the universe, why don't I see ghost images and teleportation when I walk down the street?
You hit the nail on the head regarding fragility. The reason we don't experience this in the macro world is due to a process called decoherence. When entangled particles interact with their environment, bumping into air, interacting with heat radiation, or even just being measured by a clunky classical instrument, they become entangled with that massive, noisy environment.
The signal gets lost in the static.
Exactly. The specific fragile link between the original particles diffuses into the background noise of the universe. However, our technology is advancing so rapidly that the neat little wall we built between the weird quantum lab and the normal classical world is completely crumbling.
Really?
Oh, yeah. We are scaling this phenomenon up across unbelievable extremes.
Let's talk about that scale. Because we're not just doing this on tabletops anymore, are we?
Far from it. In 2017, the Manumission satellite distributed entangled photons from orbit to ground stations in China.
Wow.
Yeah, maintaining the quantum link over a record 12,203 kilometers. We are successfully beaming this delicate connection through the atmosphere from space.
So distant is clearly no longer a barrier. What about the types of particles? Are we stuck with just photons of light?
Not at all. We're seeing it in the most extreme physical environments imaginable. In 2023, the ATLS detector at the Large Hadron Collider successfully measured entanglement in top quarks.
Top quarks. Those are insanely heavy and exist for a fraction of a second before decaying.
Exactly. Measuring entanglement at those extreme energy scales proves that this isn't just a low-energy quark. It operates at the absolute frontier of high-energy particle physics. Furthermore, physicists at Brookhaven National Laboratory have demonstrated that the quarks and gluons inside protons are entangled with each other.
Meaning the very protons that make up the atoms in my body aren't just bags of loose parts. Their internal structure is fundamentally held together by this interdependent web.
Yes. And perhaps most astonishingly, we are scaling up in actual physical size. Well, in 2011, researchers successfully entangled 2 macroscopic millimeter-sized diamonds at room temperature. And in 2020, they reported quantum entanglement between the motion of millimeter-sized mechanical drumheads.
A millimeter is massive. You can see that with the naked eye. You don't need a microscope to see a millimeter.
It proves that the laws of quantum mechanics don't suddenly turn off when things get bigger. It just gets exponentially harder to shield larger objects from the decoherence of the environment. But as our engineering improves, the boundary between the quantum world and the classical world is being revealed as an illusion.
We have gone from Albert Einstein furiously writing papers to disprove spooky action at a distance, to a reality where we are literally engineering it. We are teleporting quantum states by destroying the originals. We are snapping ghost images from shadows. We are linking vibrating drumheads and satellites in orbit. It makes you wonder, if everything was packed into an infinitesimally small point during the Big Bang, isn't it possible that everything is entangled?
That intuition points to one of the most mind-expanding concepts in modern physics. If you want to know how deep the rabbit hole really goes, we have to look at quantum field theory, specifically the Riesch-Schleider theorem.
I am strapped in. What does the theorem say?
In quantum field theory, we don't really view particles as isolated little billiard balls. We view them as temporary excitations, little ripples in underlying fields that stretch across the entire universe.
Okay.
The Riesch-Schleider theorem suggests that entanglement isn't just a rare phenomenon we carefully manufacture in a lab or inside a particle collider. It mathematically implies that the vacuum state itself is highly entangled.
The vacuum state. You mean empty space?
Yes. The state of absolute lowest energy, what you and I would call complete nothingness, isn't empty. It is a bubbling soup of quantum fields. And the theorem suggests that any local region of this vacuum is profoundly entangled with any other region, no matter how far away.
Wait, so if I just look at the empty air hovering above my desk, you're saying that nothingness is actually an infinite, invisible web of entanglement tying the fabric of the universe together?
The math strongly points to that conclusion. Local operations on the vacuum in one region of space could, theoretically, be correlated with any other region. The very emptiness of space is structurally defined by these non-local quantum connections. The universe isn't a collection of separate things. It is a single, inseparably woven tapestry.
I think my brain just wave function collapsed.
Yeah.
I started this deep dive talking about the comforting local reality of a green apple sitting on a desk. But knowing what we know now, that beneath that solid green surface, inside the protons of its atoms, and even the seemingly empty air surrounding it, there's a spooky, instantaneous dance happening that links it to the rest of the cosmos. I don't think I'll ever look at an apple the same way again. The illusion of isolation is completely gone. So, something for you to mull over as you look at the empty space in your room today. Keep diving deep, everyone.
So, if I just put a heavy gold circle covered in massive diamonds on the table right in front of you right now, your brain immediately categorizes it with a single word, right? Expensive.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, market value.
Right. But if I take that exact same circle of gold and just place it on someone's head, your brain instantly shifts gears. It stops thinking about the price tag and it starts thinking about authority. It immediately tells you that the person wearing that circle is in charge.
It completely overrides our rational perception of an object. I mean, a piece of jewelry stops being just jewelry and transforms into a physical mechanism of control.
Which is crazy when you think about it. And to understand how human beings developed this, the psychological machinery, we are relying today on a really comprehensive Wikipedia overview detailing the concept of regalia.
Yeah, and the linguistic roots of the concept really hint at that necessity. The word regalia, it comes from a Latin substantivation of the adjective regalis, meaning regal, which descends from rex, meaning king.
And welcome, by the way, to this custom-tailored deep dive. Our mission for you today is to look past all the shiny objects and the diamonds and understand how human beings have historically materialized, communicated, and honestly guarded the abstract concept of power.
Right, because in its earliest iterations, the term strictly denoted the elaborate formal dress and accessories of a sovereign. But as we're going to see, the scope of what constitutes regalia is vastly more complex than just, a heavy hat or a velvet cape.
We always just kind of assume kings and emperors wore crowns just to show off their bank accounts. But the historical sources reveal a landscape of authority that is much more desperate. They didn't wear these objects to brag.
No, not at all.
They wore them because if they didn't, their power would literally evaporate. So let's start with the root problem. Before a monarch ever puts on a crown, they have to possess something invisible. The source refers to this as abstract regalia.
Right, the invisible crown. These are the exclusive rights, prerogatives, and privileges held strictly by a sovereign. And the classic example given is the right to mint coins.
Because controlling the currency is like the ultimate abstract power, right?
Exactly. Specifically, it's the exclusive right to mint coins bearing your own effigy. You are forcing the entire economy to physically pass your face back and forth in order to trade.
That is such a wild concept.
It is. You are embedding your personal authority into the daily survival of every single citizen. I mean, from a baker buying flour to a general paying his soldiers, your face is in their hands.
It functions incredibly similarly to having super admin privileges on a computer network. The power isn't a tangible object you can hold. It's the exclusive, invisible authority to just alter the base code of the system.
That's a really good way to look at it.
But the vulnerability of that invisible power is glaring. If you're a medieval king and you have these super admin privileges, how do you make sure the vassals remember who is actually in charge when you aren't in the room? Especially when you're like 300 miles away in a different castle.
Well, that geographic and logistical vulnerability is exactly why abstract regalia was constantly under threat. Especially in feudal societies, where the central state lacked a massive standing army. The sovereign's power would just slowly erode over time.
Because people would just start ignoring the rules.
Pretty much. Lesser vassals or ambitious local lords would quietly start usurping these rights. They might start minting their own local currency, or they might monopolize a local resource that technically belonged to the crown.
Which brings up a remarkably specific example from the source material. The Upper Hertzwater Regale in Germany. From what I understand, this wasn't just about a king saying, I own this lake.
No, it was much more abstract than that. It was a royal prerogative dictating the use of water resources in a specific mountain range. The mechanics of it are fascinating because they demonstrate how incredibly granular abstract power can get.
So what did they actually claim to own?
The sovereign claimed exclusive rights over the kinetic energy of the moving water.
Wait, the kinetic energy?
Yes. If a local miner wanted to build a water wheel to pump out a mine shaft or crush ore, they couldn't just do it because the water happened to flow across their own private land.
Wow.
They were legally required to acknowledge that the force of the water belonged to the crown, and they had to be granted permission or pay a tax just to harness it.
So the king literally owned gravity and fluid dynamics in that specific zip code. That is unbelievable.
It's a massive flex of invisible power.
But this brings us directly back to the marketing problem, because abstract power requires physical marketing. If your power is an invisible legal claim over moving water, and you have dozens of wealthy nobles constantly trying to steal that claim, you have to find a way to make the invisible undeniable.
Right. You materialize the abstract rights. You wrap the human body in the wealth, the reach, and the craftsmanship of the state.
This is the origin point of wearable authority. Monarchs developed highly specific garments and accessories to visually separate themselves from the rest of humanity the second they entered a room.
Exactly. Because abstract rights like minting coins don't visually distinguish a ruler in a crowded room.
Yeah.
You need wearable authority.
I want to look closely at these garments because the source lists a bunch of items that sound like they belong in a fantasy novel. I mean, the ermine mantles make sense. Fur was obviously expensive. But then we have things like the cap of maintenance. What actually is a cap of maintenance, and why does it command authority?
So a cap of maintenance is traditionally a ceremonial cap made of crimson velvet and lined with ermine.
Okay, sounds fancy.
It is, but its power isn't really in its material, it's in its spatial function. Historically, in British tradition, it is carried on a wand before the monarch during specific processions, or it's worn by the monarch as a symbol of divine grace or favor.
Oh, so it's not always even on their head?
Right. It acts as an outrider. Before you even see the sovereign, you see the symbol of their maintained authority physically moving through the space.
It's an advanced warning system for power. I love that. And the regional variations are just as deliberate, right? In Muscovy, the Russian czars wore something called barmy. The source describes them as detachable silk collars covered in precious medallions.
Yeah, and the modular nature of the barmy is the key to understanding them. Russian court dress was incredibly heavy and layered. It was designed to project this massive, almost immobile stability.
So they weren't exactly doing jumping jacks in these things.
Far from it. By wearing this broad, detachable collar, encrusted with religious and dynastic iconography, the Tsar is literally wearing the history and divine sanction of the state, and it's resting heavily on their shoulders.
I see how layering yourself in heavy silk and gold shouts status. But status is sort of static, right? If we move from the garments that drape over the monarch down to the smaller accessories, the psychological message totally changes. A crown or a heavy collar says, I am above you. But a ring seems to communicate something fundamentally different.
It really does. A ring is rarely about sheer dominance. It is almost universally a symbol of a vow or a contract.
Like a wedding ring.
Precisely. In royal regalia, putting a ring on the monarch's finger symbolizes a literal marriage to the state. The sovereign is entering into a binding, reciprocal relationship with the realm itself.
Which brings up the Doge of the Republic of Venice, which is one of my favorite details in this whole deep dive. The source notes that the Doge used a ring to symbolize a marriage to the state's lifeblood, which was the sea.
Yes, the Adriatic Sea.
Right, but I'm trying to wrap my head around this practically. Wait, so is this just a metaphor, or did the Doge actually treat the ocean as a geopolitical spouse? Like, did he go out on a boat and toss a ring into the water?
He absolutely did. The ceremony is called the Sposabilio del Mare, the marriage of the sea. Every single Ascension Day, the Doge would sail out to the Adriatic on a spectacular state galley, and he'd drop a consecrated ring into the water.
You're kidding.
No, and he would declare Venice and the sea to be indissolubly one.
Okay, but did the average Venetian actually care, or was this just elite theater? Because throwing jewelry into saltwater doesn't exactly stop a foreign navy from invading your lagoon.
Well, it doesn't stop a navy, but it creates the domestic cohesion required to build one. For a republic built literally on top of a lagoon, relying on maritime trade, made the sea the most crucial partner the Venetian state had.
So it's a geopolitical wedding ceremony.
Exactly. Maritime trade and naval supremacy weren't just industries for them. They were the sole reasons Venice existed as a superpower.
Ah, I see.
By publicly marrying the sea, the government was anchoring its political legitimacy to the very forces of nature that kept the citizens fed and wealthy. It tells the populace, our control over these trade routes isn't just luck. It's a sacred, eternal union.
It creates a profound psychological buy-in. You are turning a simple piece of jewelry into a massive socio-political statement.
Right.
But let's take that concept objects that dictate action rather than just static status and look at what the sovereign actually holds in their hands. Because clothing wraps the monarch, but what they hold in their hands dictates how they are expected to act.
We're moving from garments of status to tools of action.
Yes, and the sheer variety of handheld regalia in the source is wild. Let's start with the French hand of justice. It's an ivory staff with a hand on top. I always found that image a bit eerie. Why a detached hand instead of just a standard royal scepter?
Well, the specific posture of the ivory hand is the crucial detail there. It is carved with 2 fingers extended, which mimics the traditional gesture of a clerical blessing.
Oh, so it's not a fist or something aggressive.
No, exactly. A standard sword or a heavy mace communicates martial power, the ability to kill or conquer. But the hand of justice communicates the joint prerogative to judge, to heal, and to offer mercy.
It tells the public that the monarch holds the moral authority of the state, not just a monopoly on violence.
Which is a heavy burden of virtue to carry.
Totally. And then you have the Malay tradition, which utilizes the royal krizik. The source describes this as an asymmetrical dagger. But why does the blade need to be asymmetrical to project authority?
The kris is just a masterpiece of metallurgical and spiritual engineering. The wavy blade, which is known as the luck, is intentionally designed to represent a naga, or a serpent, in motion.
So it looks alive.
Yes. And furthermore, historically, these blades were often forged using meteoritic iron, incorporating rare nickel patterns.
Iron from space. That is undeniably cool.
Right. And in Malay and Indonesian cultures, a royal kris is not merely a weapon. It is believed to possess its own spirit or essence. When a ruler wields it, they aren't just holding a sharp piece of metal. They're acting as a conduit for ancestral authority and cosmic alignment.
So I'm seeing a real pattern here. The physical object is just a housing unit for a much larger philosophical idea. The French house, divine judgment in an ivory hand. The Malay house, ancestral spirits and meteoritic iron. And the Chinese, the source mentions the heirloom seal of the realm, which represented the mandate of heaven.
Right, the ultimate stamp of cosmic approval in Chinese history. A piece of jade that basically proved heaven itself endorsed your dynasty.
And then, shifting gears totally, the Celtic tradition houses dominion in a tiny bird.
Yes, the wren.
The source mentions the Celtic hunting of a wren, kept in a cage as part of royal tradition. Capturing a tiny bird seems so anticlimactic compared to space daggers.
It sounds that way, but capturing and parading a live wren, which is often considered the king of all birds in Celtic mythology despite its tiny size, it flips the standard dynamic of power.
How so?
Well, holding a massive sword shows you can defeat a large, slow enemy, but capturing a tiny, fragile, hypervigilant bird without crushing it, that demonstrates an absolute, inescapable dominion over even the most elusive aspects of the natural world.
It's precision power. I didn't think about it that way.
Yeah, it's about control, not brute force.
Which brings up a really fascinating contrast, because while some rulers show off their power by parading it around, others show off their power by completely hiding it. The source talks about Japan's 3 sacred treasures, the Sanshu no Jingi.
Oh yes, the sword, the jewel, and the mirror.
Right. The sword, Kusanagi, represents valor. The jewel, Yasakani no Magatama, represents benevolence. And the mirror, Yata no Kagami, represents wisdom. But the thing that fascinated me is that these treasures have been hidden from the public since the year 690.
Entirely hidden.
Yeah.
Seen only by the emperor and certain high-ranking priests.
It's like the ultimate ancient NDA. I mean, in a world where power is usually about showing off, the ultimate flex here is having power so sacred nobody is even allowed to look at it.
It's a brilliant psychological strategy. The mystery itself becomes the regalia.
But there's a massive problem with all of these objects we've talked about, visible or hidden. The ivory hand, the wavy dagger, the Doge's ring, they only work if you're standing right next to the person holding them.
Spatial limitations.
Exactly. If you are a citizen standing at the absolute back of a massive plaza during a coronation, you can't see the nickel pattern in the kris. You definitely can't see the ring on a finger. The visual mechanism breaks down over distance.
And that limitation is the catalyst for the next major evolution of regalia, because physical objects can only be seen up close. To command a whole environment, to exert authority over thousands of people simultaneously, a sovereign must monopolize the senses themselves.
They have to dictate what people see from afar and what they hear.
Exactly. Which brings us to the monopolization of color and sound.
The ultimate VIP pass. Let's dig into the monopolization of color first, starting with Rome and Tyrian purple. The source brings this up, and I think today people hear purple and just imagine like a nice synthetic fabric dye.
Oh, it was anything but synthetic.
The reality of acquiring this color was brutal and industrially massive, wasn't it?
The production of Tyrian purple was an astonishing undertaking. The dye was extracted from the secretions of specific predatory sea snails in the Mediterranean. Snails. And it took tens of thousands of these rotting mollusks, processed in massive vats, just to yield enough dye to color a single garment.
Oh, wow. And I imagine rotting sea snails did not smell great.
It produced a notoriously horrendous stench. The workshops had to be kept outside the city limits. But the sheer economic cost of that supply chain made the color itself a physical manifestation of limitless wealth.
And because it was so obscenely expensive, the Roman imperial court legally reserved the color strictly for themselves.
Right.
But, an emperor can't be everywhere at once.
Right.
So they utilized this color to delegate their authority. They allowed members of the Senate to wear a specific purple stripe on their white togas. The source calls this a high aulic distinction, the purpuratus.
Put yourself in the Roman Forum for a second. It's crowded, it's chaotic, it's filled with thousands of citizens, merchants, soldiers. You do not have time to stop and ask for credentials.
No ID badges.
But if you see a man walking through the crowd wearing a toga with that distinct, violently expensive purple stripe, the color itself alters your behavior. You instantly know this individual has direct ties to the imperial center.
The color demands deference before a single word is even spoken. You are legally restricting a literal wavelength of light. And if we look at late imperial China, they did the exact same thing with the color yellow, but they tied it to the fundamental physics of the universe, right?
They did. Chinese cosmology was structured around the wuxing, or the 5 elements, and their corresponding colors, directions, and energies. Yellow was the color of Earth, but crucially, it represented the center of the universe.
So by legally reserving pure yellow garments exclusively for the emperor, they are weaving the emperor into the literal fabric of reality.
Exactly. It's not just a status symbol like, I have more money than you, so I wear yellow. It's an ontological statement. I am the geographic and spiritual axis upon which the entire cosmos spins.
Which is why peasants, and even high-ranking noblemen, were strictly forbidden from wearing robes made entirely of yellow.
They could use it sparingly in specific sanctioned contexts, but the pure monopolized block of yellow was the visual footprint of the Son of Heaven. It is sheer environmental control.
So you control the light, you control what people see, but human beings have eyelids, right? We can just look away. We cannot, however, close our ears. Which brings us to the monopolization of sound. Music is a binding legal parameter.
Audio regalia.
Yes. The source lists silver trumpets and the Nakara drum in Mewar, India. But the detail that completely stopped me in my tracks was the Malaysian Nobat Orchestra.
The ceremonial Nobat ensemble is one of the most striking examples of audio regalia in the world.
The text explicitly states that the playing of this orchestra is a formal requirement for a valid Malaysian coronation. I need to understand the mechanics of this.
Okay.
Because my modern brain hears orchestra at a coronation and thinks, oh, nice background music for the party. But if it's a formal legal requirement, does this mean if the band gets a flat tire and misses the ceremony, the coronation is legally void? Is the music actually functioning as a legal document?
That is exactly what it's doing. To really understand the Nobat, you have to completely discard the modern notion of music as entertainment.
Okay, discarding it.
In this specific ceremonial context, the sound produced by those specific drums, flutes, and gongs is the audio signature of the state itself. Think of it like a wax seal on a royal decree. A piece of paper with instructions on it is just a piece of paper until that wax seal validates it.
So the music is a sonic wax seal.
Precisely. The ritual requires the audio signature to bind the legal and spiritual transition of power. The actual reverberation of the drums in the air is the actualization of the coronation. Without the sound, the contract simply hasn't been signed.
Wow, that completely reframes every royal fanfare I've ever heard. It's not a song, it's an oral contract being broadcast into the physical space.
Sound itself becomes a parameter of statecraft.
And here's the terrifyingly effective thing about these visual and audio contracts. They work so incredibly well on human psychology that power structures outside of the monarchy immediately stole the playbook.
Oh, the impulse to materialize authority didn't die when the guillotine fell or when republics were formed. Not at all.
No. The source material outlines how these exact same rules of restricted dress and visual distinction survive today, all around you, in entirely non-royal contexts. It's what the source calls beyond the throne.
Think about modern republics. The Latin American presidential sash is a perfect example.
Right. It's a broad, brightly colored band of fabric worn across the chest. Conceptually, it serves the exact same distinguishing function as a heavy ermine mantle. It is a wearable mandate that visually separates the executive from the legislature and the citizenry.
And we see an even older continuation of this in academia.
Yes, university academic dress.
The heavy robes, the specific hoods, the academicals, these are direct descendants of medieval guild and clerical garments, and they are strictly regulated by the institution. You can't just buy a doctoral gown online and wear it to a commencement ceremony.
Well, I mean, you could, but people would be very upset.
Oh, right, because you have to earn the specific status that legally permits you to wear that specific arrangement of fabric and color.
You're literally putting on medieval regalia to prove to a room full of people that you survived the modern gauntlet of an engineering or law degree. It's the exact same psychological mechanism as the Roman purpuratus.
It really is. And the source also highlights how deeply this mechanism is woven into indigenous cultures today. Consider the traditional ceremonial dress worn by Native American peoples in the United States and First Nations peoples in Canada.
Specifically the regalia used in powwows and hoop dancing, right?
Yes.
And this is where the terminology is really crucial. It's deeply disrespectful to call these garments costumes, because a costume is something you put on to pretend to be someone else.
Exactly. A costume hides your identity. Indigenous regalia amplifies and authenticates identity. The beadwork, the feathers, the specific patterns, these aren't just decorative fashion choices.
Right.
They are physical manifestations of a person's heritage, their specific community standing, their family history, and their spiritual connection. It is a living, wearable record of respect and continuity.
Which proves just how universal this concept is for us as a species. Whether you are a newly elected president putting on a sash, a university student adjusting your graduation hood, or an indigenous dancer stepping into the powwow circle, you are participating in a direct continuation of the exact same human necessity that drove the creation of the kris or the Doge's ring.
We need abstract concepts like knowledge, heritage, or legal authority to be tangible. We need to be able to see the structure of our society.
We need the invisible to be made visible, because without it, we wouldn't know how to navigate each other. If we synthesize everything we've pulled from this deep dive today, it completely shatters the idea that regalia is just a collection of shiny, expensive museum pieces.
It really does.
Every ring, every ivory hand, every purple stripe, and every drumbeat is a highly engineered tool designed to solve a very specific, desperate problem. How do you prove you have power when power itself doesn't actually have a shape?
You build the architecture of authority out of whatever materials your culture values most, whether that is meteoritic iron, sea snail dye, or the force of a mountain river.
Which leaves me with a thought I really want you, the listener, to take with you and turn over in your own mind. We spent this entire time looking backward at how historical power monopolized physical resources. They controlled the dye, they hoarded the right to mint coins, they guarded the sacred swords. But the mechanics of power haven't changed, only the tools have.
The necessity for a marketing department for invisible power is still very much with us today.
Exactly. So what is the invisible regalia of our modern digital age? In a world where absolutely anyone can broadcast a thought to millions of people instantly, or digitally mint their own cryptocurrency from a laptop on their couch, what are the modern unspoken symbols we use right now to instantly signal to the room that we hold the super admin privileges? Is it algorithmic priority? Is it a verified checkmark? Is it the complete absence of a digital footprint? We expect power to look like a gold crown, but the true regalia of our time is almost certainly hiding in plain sight.